Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm conscious about the fact that I am pitted against giants out here. And, my good friend Anurag talked me into taking part in this debate. Only later did I learn that who I'm up against. But anyway, notwithstanding that, let me start by 2 points about the previous speakers from the opposing side. The earlier speaker just now started his speech in Hindi to remind us that if you don't understand or speak Hindi, you're not Indian. I'd like him to look at the currency notes and realize that we took a decision after independence, that there are many more languages that make India. And in fact, English language, in which we are all conversing here, connects us a lot better to South India than perhaps Shudh Hindi does. Okay, so let's absorb that point. The second point, and that was the first speaker from the opposition, made this point that recreation is about reminding our people that we have a great culture, but that is what we are here to do, not they. Because we have to, if you want the recreation of the idea of India, you have to come up with something new. You can't reinforce that is already there. And that is the challenge with my worthy opponents there. Now let me remind people one thing, that when you recreate something, you are kind of jumping onto a bandwagon which has been created by the West. Because Western thinking is linear. And therefore, you have to shift in times and periods of time, and therefore keep recreating yourself or reinventing yourself. Our thinking, ladies and gentlemen, some people call it Orientalist, our thinking is cyclic. Therefore, we keep coming back to the yugs. We keep coming back. And that cultural heady mix that makes the cocktail of India exists, ladies and gentlemen. We don't need to borrow ideas from the West. We need to strengthen and feel proud of what we are in India. And that is a point where I agree with my worthy colleagues here, that whether it is a post-47 approach or it is an approach that they want to challenge the people in the opposition, which is pre-47, the invasions is a point which seems to get a lot of people together. But the invasions had two sides to it. Yes, there were massacres, and nobody should be defending that. But the invasions also brought you a cultural mix that has made today India the world's greatest assembly of small and little traditions and cultures. And that is something that enamors everybody in the West and people who come in from the West to settle here like Mr. Francis got here. Because that is India. And you can't take that away from India. The second thing which we need to understand, that the India that we all cherish, but unfortunately has been ignored in the recent past because our desperate attempts to follow the West and to try and create a model which perhaps worked in the West, but to my mind may not work here, is an India that cannot be modeled on Western models or paradigms. Because the India that exists today is an India where there are many societies, many cultural influences that run parallel to each other. The trajectories are parallel, but we are all heading and we are all absorbing each other's passions and still accepting the fact that my pace need not dictate your pace. And that is the India that we need to understand and feel proud about and not want to recreate, because you cannot reinvent a wheel when a wheel already exists. The other point that is equally important, and this is a point where I feel very strongly about, that you cannot have a centralized narrative of the majority being imposed on the vast number of people that make up India and who do not accept one centralized narrative. Because social studies and history have shown that large collections of people will have a collection of narratives. And you cannot have one central narrative, however good it may be, for us reaching those multi-trillion-dollar figures that my worthy opponent talked about. But is that all that we should aspire for? And that is a question I think we need to ask ourselves and touch ourselves and tell us that that is not, I think, deep inside, that everything that we want. Yes, the English-speaking city elites, and many of them here, would like to perhaps think that, yes, following the Western model may be a good idea, but there are a lot of other people who are struggling with the baggage of the past. But for them, there is an optimism. And that optimism hasn't been provided in the last 5 years. That optimism has always existed in the psyche of an average Indian. And that is the optimism that we must reinforce and we must all strengthen. The other point that we must understand that a billion people, a billion plus people, will have a collection of ideas that will make them accept the idea of India. So the idea of India cannot be just one centralized approach to things, but a heady mix of our cultural, our pluralistic traditions, and our history. If somebody asks you who is an Indian, the answer for me would be one who connects with everything that Indians cherish, whether it's the political process, whether it's cricket, whether it's entertainment, whether it's religious traditions. So an Indian is an Indian who connects with India. And you do not have to be and belong to one particular approach politically or religiously to be counted as an Indian. And that's at which I rest my argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Maroof. I rather liked what you said, and I just want to pick up 2 or 3 of those formulations. A centralized narrative of the majority, our pluralistic traditions, and the optimism that we must reinforce. At least 2 of those 3 are issues trends that Rajiv referred to. But let me take you back to those pluralistic traditions. One of the great things about the idea of India, now post-47, or for that matter, in the 6th century BC, when we had republics, is the idea of democracy. Do you think the great idea of democracy, that plant of democracy, has to be nurtured by one party, one family, or do you think it needs to be spread? And my question is specific, because Nehruvian socialism, its successes, those are issues we can debate. But if you have a party which has a great tradition, the Grand Party which won India, which facilitated our independence, but chooses thereafter to view democracy and governance in terms of an entitlement only for its own family members, where do you stand on that one?
Mr. Puri, so I'm not a card-carrying member of the Congress Party.
I like what you said.
Yes, and therefore, I didn't have enough time, but I actually wanted to say that my approach to the idea of India goes a little beyond 1947. Because yes, Mr. Nehru did make enormous contribution, but so did many other of our founding fathers. And I think we have to give everybody credit. And I'm not here to pass judgment or criticism on giants. But the only thing that I wish to say is that while I support a pluralistic India, which has been weaved together under the democratic umbrella that is India today, I do not necessarily buy the argument that one family or one individual can be responsible for making India the magical India that we have today.
Mr. Gautier, go ahead.
But you spoke about the invasions, and you said there were some good things and bad things. Now, I have a question about the invasions. Don't you think that the invaders were all, in some degree, assimilated by the Indianness that existed before them in India? Whether, it's Indian Sufism or some of the Syrian Christians. Today, it's going back to more fundamentalist. But isn't that a great possibility that, again, we see that softening of those invaders, those who came as invaders?
I said precisely that, and with no disrespect to you, sir, you've also been assimilated in India. You're an outsider.
Absolutely.
So India has the enormous capacity to assimilate cultures, people, individuals, and that's the point I made. And let me tell you that the invasions were also by the British Empire, just like the empire invaded other parts of the world, and that has left behind many other legacies for us, which has made India, post-47, easy to govern. The Constitution, if I may understand correctly, is also a modified version of the Government of India Act, the railways, the civil service, the armed forces, the census of India, and the entire sort of the mapping of India, which today tells us where we are at what point of time, was all done during the days of the empire. So, you know, there are merits to it, but I'm not a defender and apologist for the empire.